so that you're not just evaluating the design and its usability and its efficacy in solving a customer problem, but you're also starting to evaluate whether that problem exists at all.
So, Nisreen, what's on your mind these days?
But when it comes to research, I think it's about the research maturity journey. I think there is a time when we talked a lot about the design maturity journey, and you have a lot of maturity models that reflect that. I don't think we're talking enough as a research thought leadership group about what that maturity journey looks like for research in particular, because there's different flags, there's different signals, there's different things that you need to invest in to mature a research team. When I think about it, I'm thinking about things like research operations. Research can be really, really slow when you don't have the operations in place to facilitate quality recruitment, for example, or the research tooling landscape is really, really fragmented and can be really expensive if you're not navigating it appropriately. So to be really efficient with your budget, it's helpful to have a leader who's really well versed in operations, or to even have a research operations lead or team that you're coordinating with to really navigate those relationships and build up a toolbox that's effective for the sort of research that your team is doing. So I feel like operations is a key one. I think another one is a lot of researchers talk about, we want to be strategic, we want to be strategic, we want to be strategic. But we get stuck in what I call the evaluative vortex, where you're not doing a lot of generative work. So to reduce risk in launching new products or launching optimization, you're doing a ton of usability testing, because that's all that you can do to reduce the level of risk, because you don't have other knowledge to inform whether or not you're making the right design decisions. And especially if you're working on a product where any sort of change can have a massive impact on your company's bottom line, that becomes really problematic, right? Because everybody wants to reduce that risk. You kind of get stuck in that space. And so that's something else that I think is part of the research maturity journey as well, is investing the time and becoming more up funnel.
Yeah, I think that is quite tricky, because I think a lot of organizations, you're right, start with that evaluative testing, usability testing.
I think in order to move out of that space, you need to work really effectively with your partners to decide what is our risk tolerance as an organization, and where are we comfortable with taking on more risk versus less, so that we can move ahead in the process and do more of that foundational research that can inform things down the line.
And it's challenging to show the value of actually doing that generative research, getting ahead of those product decisions and showing how to mitigate risk. You mentioned that, but how do you show the value of that if you don't actually have the opportunity or the time to do that generative research?
I think about it in two different ways, right? One is that you can do it through the work. The way that it shows up through the work is integrating more exploratory questions into the evaluative research that you're doing, so that you're not just evaluating the design and its usability and its efficacy in solving a customer problem, but you're also starting to evaluate whether that problem exists at all. Maybe it's not ideal because you're not doing a full IDI or more in-depth qualitative study that you want to do to inform that, but it gives you a couple of data points to rely on, so that when you're delivering your results, if you're seeing conflicts, you can raise that. And we could have found this out sooner before investing time in design if we were involved more upfront. Look, this is how I would have done it differently. Why don't we pilot that next time? So it's a good way of showing the value of that data in a very specific use case. Another way that you can look at it too is just in conversations we're having around how we want to design against something, how we want to solve against something. I find a lot of times we question ourselves a lot as a design team. Is this the best way? We generate a lot of ideas. It's part of the design process, right? To think about all of the different ways that we can solve a particular problem. And a lot of times we waste a lot of time talking in circles about what the best approach is before finally aligning on one and getting it to a good place for testing. So as those sort of circular conversations are happening, something I like to do is call out, hey, if we did some upfront research now, we can inform the best direction. And sometimes, depending on how timelines are malleable, maybe the design team can focus on something where there's a little bit more certainty or focus on what the right solution would be. And then we can table working on the design for the thing we're less certain about, invest some time in research and then inform the design process that way. So I've also found that to be really effective in being, hey, we clearly have a lack of alignment about which direction we want to go in. This is just taking more and more time. In fact, research can speed up this process versus slow it down. So that also goes against the common myth that research is a blocker, research is slow. By driving alignment and facilitating decision making, research can actually speed things rather than slow things down.
Yes, I totally agree. We have the opportunity to really inform direction and say, this is the user need. And this is the problem we need to solve, right? And give that to the team that kind of North Star to make those design decisions and not be, like you mentioned, swirling around trying to decide which solution is best. So, Nisreen, we're talking about UX maturity. What wish people knew about UX or UX research when it comes to your job? What do you wish they understood better?
I think it's like how highly contextual it is. It's not just about design principles or design best practices, although those are really, really important. I think it's understanding how people are interacting with technologies in their daily lives. That's where the magic is. And especially post-pandemic, I think a lot of teams have devoted more and more time into like remote research. It's faster, it's easier, it's cheaper a lot of the time. But we kind of like lose understanding how people are interacting with things in the moment. Like if I'm shopping on Amazon, for example, I'm really like sitting down, walking through a flow, thinking about it kind of like as I go along. It's usually I'm half listening to something my husband's saying or watching my son play in the background. So just understanding where people are like mentally in their lives and how that's driving decision making as they interact with the flow. I think that's something that not just non-UX people recognize, but sometimes even we as a discipline can sometimes.
Yeah, and how small our product is in their world and their ecosystem.
Exactly. There's like such a large journey that's often associated with any particular like app or product. And that app or product is one part of that greater journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that teams are becoming more open to exploring that external world besides the product or service that your company is offering?
I think it really depends on what company you're supporting and what their priorities are, right? If your business priorities are really focused on things like conversion and moving through an application flow, you're going to be considering how you research that very differently than something that's more like discovery based, right? And so I think it really depends on the interaction patterns that exist with that product and the business priorities that are driving that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thinking about, again, as we've kind of talked about some similar themes and maturity and whatnot, I think sometimes a lower sign of maturity is the researcher goes off, does the work, and brings the report back and says, voila, here it is. Versus having your partners, product partners, designers, even tech participate with you, not the research, but observe and help plan and review your research plan and whatnot.